Thank you. The Amy Williams meetings, I'm going to announce the people who signed up and the times and the dates. For Thursday, July 24th at 2, Renee Sims, then Buzz, Marguerite Sullivan. Excuse me, I better give you the times, or you would just... Renee Sims at 2, at 2:10, Buzz, 2:20, Marguerite Sullivan, 2:30, Mark Powell, 2:40, Jesse Kessler, 2:50, John Bolin, and 3, Corey Campbell. For Friday, this is Group 2. At 2 o'clock, Sarah Domet, Ileana Rampage, Alyssa, Carolyn Kinney, Julie Case, Hal Ackerman, and Norris Epps. I did, and I'm going to do that again.
That was not till Friday. The sheets will be out on the mail table at the end.
Yeah, the sheets will be out at the mail table at the end. We did this last minute. I said I'll do your, so I've just got these written notes that I can't even read my own handwriting. So yeah, they'll be out. But 2 o'clock is Sarah, 2:10, Ileana, 2:20, Alyssa, 2:30, Carolyn, 2:40, Julie Case, 2:50, Hal Ackerman, and at 3, Norris Epps. Tomorrow at breakfast, we'll put out the sheets for Hockman and Forlan, the sign-up sheets. They'll be in the same place where we have all of the sign-up sheets. Tonight at 9:30, what's happening? Pub, scholars readings. We have 7 scholars who are going to read tonight. Please come over and join us. And now we're going to do the raffle. Oh, hike. 6:15 in the morning. Who's coming? 2 miles. We're going to do I'm going to take you in a passenger van. It's going to be a easy to moderate 2-mile hike to the cross and back. And we're going to have the van right outside. And I'll be standing there doing this. 6:15 in the morning. If you just want to roll over from the French house over here, that's fine. And now we're going to do the raffle.
First winner is of Claudia Emerson, Secure the Shadow. Can we have a drum roll, please? All right. These numbers have been randomly generated, and the winner is Serena Lynn. Is she here? She's what? Well,
yay!
We've decided this year that if the person is absent, we're going to boo them and shame them, and we're going to move on to the next person. The winner of John Casey's Room for Improvement, A Life in Sport, beautiful book, is Will Wolfett. And finally, the winner of B.H. Fairchild's Usher is Matt Briggs. And welcome, B.H. Fairchild.
Okay, thought I'd give a poetry reading. I want to thank Megan very much for making my trip out here a little bit easier. And I want to thank Wyatt Prunty once again, not only for inviting me this time, but And as many times as I come here, I will thank him for this, and that is bringing me here as a Dakin Fellow back in 1992, where the most important event in my poetry life occurred. And I'm not going to tell that story, but if you want to buy me a drink, that's that would be fine. I really enjoy coming here. There's something in you, that doesn't really want to let the people who write the checks know how fun it is here. But it is, it's like, well, you're among your own kind, and how often does that happen? I tried to find the right metaphor for it, and I think it's like being back in high school and hanging out with all the kids you wanted to hang out, except they didn't go to my high school. But they're all here, and so it could not be more pleasurable. I'm going to start with the first poem in the new poems section. I've written a lot of narrative poems, and I thought it might be nice to write a poem about narrative. So this is simply called The Story. It has no name and arrives from nowhere. Eager for new adventures, the murmur and cries of the crowded streets of Istanbul or Rome or Brooklyn, the blazing eyes of the last gray wolf deep in a cave in New Mexico, the sob of the wind between the discs of an abandoned tractor on the high plains, the homeless man chasing his runaway grocery cart down Sunset Boulevard, a young woman looking out from the front porch of a duplex in Enid, Oklahoma, waiting for the mail. It has, as they say, a mind of its own, bearing secret knowledge, truths from another world, transparent and untranslatable, luminous and cryptic. It arrives almost silently, only the slight crush of lawn grass beneath its sandals, a surprise even though you have somehow expected it. Your hands, rough and calloused from the toils of the imagination, reach out to gently shake its narrow shoulders, to tousle its well-combed hair silvered by moonlight. Where have you been? It says nothing, of course, walks to the far corner of the room and begins to pray. After waiting for hours, you offer it coffee and a slice of pecan pie, and then more coffee. When it leaves, you follow close behind in fear and a traveler's anxiety. Where can a story end? If it arrives from nowhere, where can it end? But then, as you pass through familiar streets, past the clapboard houses, the pomegranate tree just coming into bloom, the blue Buick parked by the curb, you understand. For there is your mother among the bird cries of the porch swing, reading a letter from a small island somewhere in the Pacific. There is the front door with its torn screen, the voices of a soap opera from the radio, the creak and whisper of cottonwood branches overhead. This is where the story ends. And now you know this is also where it begins. And you lean into the light, put the pen to paper, and write. I looked behind. Was there a bee that just flew? Okay. An actual bee, though? Because it looked like a bee about this size. Okay. I thought maybe it wasn't anything, and then you would think I was high or something. This next poem is called The Gray Man. And it's about a guy I worked with at my father's machine shop. We lived in a little town in the southwest corner of Kansas, and The big opportunity for us as a family was my dad getting to become a part owner of a oil field machine shop in that town, and the machine shop was located, it was the farthest point outside of town. It was out on Highway 54. Highway 54 was the main north-south route down to the famous Route 66. So a lot of hitchhikers would come along there, and they would drop in for looking for like a week or 2 weeks work, and he was a generous guy, and he would try to set them up with something. The part I don't understand is that, I was working there from the time I was like 13. When he would take one of those guys off the road and he would give him a job like cutting weeds or something, he always had me work with them. I was like 4'11" and weighed about 80 pounds. What did he expect me to oversee them? I never found out about that. But in this particular instance, this particular guy was the scariest man I've ever seen. And he's called the Gray Man because, actually, I think he looked vaguely Eastern European, but he had this terrible complexion. And also, he never said anything until this particular day. The Gray Man. We are cutting weeds and sunflowers on the shoulder, the Gray Man and I, red dust coiling up around us, muddying our sweat-smeared mugs, clogging our hair, the iron heel of an August Kansas sun pushing down on the scythes we raise against it and swing down in an almost homicidal rage and drunken weariness. And I keep my distance. He's a new hire just off the highway, a hitchhiker sick to death of hunger, the cruelties of the road, and our boss hates poverty just enough to hire it, even this old man, a dead leaden pall upon his skin so vile it makes you pull away. The grayed trousers and state-issue black prison boots, the bloodless, grim, unmoving lips, and the eyes set in concrete, dark hallways that lead to darker rooms down somewhere in the basement of the soul's despair. 2 weeks. He hasn't said a word. He's a goddamn ghost, I tell my father. Light flashes from his scythe as he decapitates big clumps of yellow blooms, a flailing, brutal war against the lords of labor, I suppose, against the state, the world, himself, who knows. When we break, I watch the canteen's water bleed from the corners of his mouth, a spreading wound across his shirt, the way he spits into the swollen pile of blue stem and rank bindweed as if he hates it and everything else that grows. A hatred that has roots and thickens, twisting, snarled around itself. A lizard wanders into sunlight, and he hacks at it, chopping clods until dust clouds rise like mist around him. And then he speaks, in a kind of shattering of glass cutting through the hot wind sigh, the fear, love thine enemy. He says it to the weeds, or maybe what they stand for. Then, knees buckling, with a rasping, gutted sob as if drowning in that slough of dirty air, he begins, trembling, to cry. I was just a boy. The plains wind leaned against the uncut weeds. High wires hummed with human voices in their travail. And the highway I had worked but never traveled lay across the fields and vanished in that distant gray where day meets night. Do I have water to drink here? Yes, I do. I come from, near LA, where Charles Bukowski is a saint, you know. He used to give readings, and he would actually require a refrigerator with beer in it to be up on the stage. Not a bad idea. When I was at the university, I liked taking foreign language classes. And they also wanted you to learn the language, you know, as conversation. And this is so ancient, but the way they would do it, then they would occasionally show a language film with, you know, a 16 millimeter projector. And everybody else in the class found these films utterly boring, and they would all go to sleep, and the professor didn't care. These language movies I always found strangely moving, because they would always be a trio or a quartet of speakers, but they would always begin, you know, in the little sidewalk cafe as if they had been there forever. And they would always end in the little sidewalk cafe as if they would go on doing this forever. So it seemed to me a film about eternity, but also about love, because they had to go on in this eternity speaking, but always keeping their conversation on the level of Spanish 101. You know, and you have to love people to to talk like that. I mean, it was. Let me find the poem here. Yes, you would have Raoul begin the conversation with something like, "I have a pencil." And Esmeralda would say, "I have a green pencil." And Julio would say, "My grandmother has a red pencil." And then Esmeralda would say, "My grandmother lives in Gonzaga," or someplace like that. So a ridiculous conversation. And so I always watched the whole film right on through, you know, developing deep sentiments for Esmeralda or whatever. So this is called Language, Nonsense, Desire. Professor Ramirez dozes behind the projector, Conversación Español lapping over the bored shoulders of sophomores who dissolve in the film's languor of talk and coffee at a sidewalk cafe in Madrid or Barcelona or some other luminous Mediterranean dream. The tanned faces rounding into the Spanish air like bowls of still life fruit offer little dialogues about streetcars or feathers over a clutter of plates and delicate white cups of mocha blend. The hands of the speakers are bright birds that lift and tremble among the anomalies of ordinary life. Piñatas, cousins who live in Peru, the last train to Zaragoza. The speakers are three friends forever entangled in the syntax of Spanish 101, fated to shape loose chatter into harmonies of discourse, arias of locus, ¿Dónde está la casa? And possession, yo tengo un perro. For non-Spanish speakers, that's I have a dog, yes. Raoul, his dark, hungry profile immaculately defined against the pallor of a white beach. The housewife Esmeralda, erotic in her onyx curls, recalling a Catholic childhood, that same black extravagance pressed against her pillow as she listened to the nun read stories and imagined herself as a gaucho, drunk and love-crazed in the hills of Argentina. And Juan Julio, articulate, epicene, fluttering his pianist fingers as he croons melodiously about the rush of time. ¿Qué hora es? son las dos? I. And always in the background, along the periphery of syllable and gesture, the silent pilgrimage of traffic and commerce and light-dazzled crowds with some destination, some far blue promise to carry them through the day, some end to speech and love. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes people running very high-toned poetry readings will, before you get up, they will say, what we like to do here at Club Snobbish or whatever, what we like to do here is save the applause until the end. And I just want to, fuck you, Yeah, it's not like we make that much money. This poem I'm going to read, which is entitled Madonna and Child, Perrotton, Texas, 1967, actually began at the Metropolitan Art Museum in New York when I was up in the Baroque room and I was looking at paintings by Francisco de Zurbarán, and I was looking at a Madonna and Child, and as I looked at it, I remembered an incident that would seem to be utterly irrelevant to the world of art, especially high art, that occurred back when I was a kind of wild young man. And the incident, actually, that I was thinking back on is occurred in Perrotton, Texas, in 1967. And I was with my friends, and it was a Friday night, and we had been out acting like young men in that area usually do, drinking a lot, smoking weed, and we were engaged in it so devotedly that we forgot that all the supermarkets had closed, all the grocery stores had closed, and of course we were by that time were afflicted with what I think is still referred to as the munchies. Right. Well, there was one place still open, which was called Sancho's Market on the south of town, and we rushed out there to satisfy our hunger. When we got there, there was Sancho, of course, and his wife, and this was not even a cash register place. The wife is standing behind the cash box. Their daughter Rosa is there, and she has her little baby, and the baby is really loud. It seems like there was one other thing that I needed to explain, but perhaps, yes, I will say this. You will notice that the child of the Madonna and Child in this poem is actually a girl, and that's my little contribution to the feminist movement thing. Madonna and Child, Perrotton, Texas, 1967. A litter of pickups nosed into Sancho's Market south of town late Friday night, rinsed in waves of pink neon and samba music from some station in Del Rio spilling out across the highway. Sancho's wife dances alone behind the cash box, while her daughter Rosa tries to quiet her baby, whose squalls rip through the store like a weed cutter, shredding the souls of the carnal, the appetitious, indeed the truly depraved. As we, in our grievous late-night stupor and post-marijuana hunger, curse the cookie selection and all its brethren. And Al yells at Lino, lost among the chips, beef jerky, string cheese, bananas, for Christ's sakes, that if he doesn't stop now and forever telling okie jokes, he will shoot his dog, who can't hunt anyway, so what the hell. But the kid is unreal, a cry ascending to a shriek, then a kind of rasping roar, the harangue of the gods, sirens cleaving the air, gangs of crazed locusts or gigantic wasps that whine and ding our ears until the air begins to throb around us, and a six-pack of long necks rattles like snakes in my hand. And then poor Rosa is kissing its forehead, baby riding her knee like a little boat lost at sea. And old Sancho can't take it either. Hands over his ears, Dios mío, you basta, Dios mío. So Rosa opens her blouse, though we don't look, and then we do. The baby sucking away, plump cheeks pumping, billowing sails of Santa Maria in a high wind. The great suck of the infinite making that little nick-nick sound. Rosa smiling down. Then Sancho turns off the radio, and we all just stand there in the light and shadow of a flickering fluorescent bulb, holding our sad little plastic baskets full of crap. Speechless and dying a little inside as Rosa whispers, "No llores, no llores, mija, mijita, no llores." And the child falls asleep, lips on breast, drops of milk trickling down. We can even hear it breathing, hear ourselves breathing, the hush all around, and that hammer in our chests, so that 40 years later, this scene still hangs in my mind, a later work, unfinished, from the workshop of Zurbaran. Thank you again. Yeah. I'm having trouble reading the clock there. I started 15 minutes ago. Yeah, okay. Of the many jobs I had when I was a student at the university, perhaps the most interesting one, interesting in a weird way, was delivering eggs to the freshman girls' dorm at 5:30 in the morning. You know, any reasonable English major who doesn't realize what kind of symbolic danger is involved in that, just, they shouldn't go to graduate school. And, you know, I mean, that's enough in itself, that I'm delivering eggs to the freshman girls' dorm, and actually, though, I had just broken up with a girl who was a freshman in the freshman girls' dorm. And you might ask, why was I, as a graduate student, dating a freshman? You might ask that, but I would encourage you not to. This is very much a period piece. And only now did I realize I made a really bad pun just then. We'll look beyond that as I explain things about the poem. There's a mention of flour here. That would be the baking ingredient rather than the other thing. There is an allusion to Charles Laughton in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Some of you who are really, really addicted movie fans will know what that means. And I think that's all I need to explain. Delivering eggs to the girls' dorm, and of course the epigraph is, "I am the Eggman." And, you know, 10, 15 years ago, I would say that, and at least some people in the audience would say, "Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo." Yeah, you don't have to, it's all right. Delivering eggs to the girls' dorm. For me, it was the cherry blossoms flooding Olive Street and softening the dawn. The windows flung open in a yawn, billowing curtains pregnant with the breeze, the sounds of Procol Harum entering the air, and 50 girls rising in their underwear. Oh, lost love. My girl and I had just split up. The leaves of chestnut trees were rinsed in black. The wind moaned grief. The moon was on the rack. Humped over, stacking egg crates in my Ford, I was Charles Laughton ringing bells at Notre Dame, spurned, wounded, but still in love with Sheila Baum. Arriving at the gates of paradise, I rang the service bell to wait on Mrs. Cornish in her saintly apron, fumbling at the door, and the raucous gush of female voices when she opened it. The flower in her beard announced the darkness of the hour. You're late. The hiss of bacon, pancake batter as it kissed the grill, were a swarm of snakes to warn the innocent away. Inside were virgins born, like Sheila Baum, to stay that way. Outside stood the Eggman, despairing in his oval fate, 50 girls staring eggless at an empty plate. They may still be staring there, for emptiness became my theme, sweeping eggshells from my car, driving empty streets, falls cherry trees as bare as dormitory walls washed by September rains. And the bells of Notre Dame were as still as the broken shell of my dream of Sheila Baum. So sad. Yeah, sometimes poems are given to you, and it's happened to me a few times, and this was just watching the weather report late at night, and the weatherman looked out at me, and his forecast was, "We will have a continuation of today tomorrow." Yes. So, you have to get up, you have to put your drink down, get up, go find a pencil and paper. Yeah. Weather report. Clouds will form those ragged gloves in which the hands of God make giant fists as he grits his teeth against the slaves of time. And the sun and moon will never rest from the boring grind of dark and light. Subway tokens glittering the ground, dogs in their habits, the hours soon or late, nuns and assassins in their daily round. The divorcee coming from the laundromat knows the cycles of laundry and despair. Back then, the towels they shared, but now a basket filled with someone else's underwear. Eichmann lies in bed and reads a novel. A Holocaust survivor sets himself on fire. The thief's in church, the priest is in the brothel, the sky is clear, the weatherman's a liar. God shakes his fists eternally to say, we're having more of yesterday today. My wife is Jewish, and I think I got the tone of that poem from her. I really envy her religion because they believe in having arguments with God, and I was brought up to never have an argument with God. But I did here. My father and his uncles growing up in rural Oklahoma were incredible baseball players, really sort of local legends as baseball players. And my grandfather assumed that if they really stuck with it, they could all go to the big leagues. Of course, they didn't. My Uncle Roy made it up to AAA, I think, but my father once told me late in life that the hardest thing he ever had to do was to go to his father and tell him that he could not make it as a baseball player. In those days, especially among blue-collar fathers, they didn't want you to go off and be a doctor or a lawyer. They wanted you to be a baseball player. And they had a guy on their team, though, that was way better than they were, and he had the wonderful name of Moses Yellowhorse. And he was a Pawnee Indian, and he was, well, my dad, as I was growing up, I'd be talking about somebody like Herb Score or Robin Roberts that I thought was really fast, and he would say, I think Moses Yellow Horse was the fastest I ever caught, the fastest there ever was. And that would really get my attention, you know. And what happened was Moses Yellow Horse was, I mean, if you're a really, really good pitcher, they will find you. And the Pittsburgh Pirates found him, and they gave him a contract. And of course, he was a kid who had never been out of Pawnee, Oklahoma, and they took him up, you know, to play. They didn't put him in a minor league team. They put him right on the roster. And, you know, he was living in a hotel with Rabbit Marinville. Rabbit Marinville and him were sort of like Mickey Mantle and the shortstop, Billy Martin, right? Real party goers. But the fact was that Moses Yellow Horse not only was able to adapt to big city life, but that he also simply was being exploited. And he was really fast. Allie Reynolds, great pitcher, said that he was the fastest he had ever seen. But they were really stupid about it, and what they were really using him for was to list him as Chief Yellow Horse. Yeah, so that's what they were doing with him. And the fact is, if they had taught him a range of pitches, he could have been a really good pitcher for them. And so because of these things, and he and Rabbit Marinville were getting drunk and throwing water balloons out of the hotel window and all of that stuff. So he only lasted a season and a half, and he had to go back to Oklahoma. Anyway, I knew for a long time that I someday wanted to write a poem about Moses Yellow Horse. There were a couple of things that, even though he only had a season and a half, made him memorable even up until probably 20 or 30 years ago. And it's one thing he did was in spring training, he struck out maybe the greatest lineup ever of Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth and Tony Lazzeri, and he struck them out with 9 straight pitches, every one a fastball. The second thing was that he actually pitched one time against Ty Cobb. And I don't know if you know much about Ty Cobb, but he was a terrible racist. And of course, if the pitcher had any kind of ethnic strangeness at all, he would use it to rattle him and make it easier to get a soft pitch. And Moses Yellow Horse threw a head ball at Ty Cobb. Actually, usually when you intentionally throw a head ball, you back off a little on it, you know, because you don't want to kill the guy. But it knocked him out cold, and they had to take Ty Cobb on a stretcher to the hospital. He was in a coma for like 8 hours, and so that was another thing. That's too much introduction, but anyway. Moses Yellow Horse is throwing water balloons from the Hotel Roosevelt. And it begins actually in Lake Como at a place called the Villa Carlotta. The combed lawn of the Villa Carlotta cools the bare feet of my aesthetic friend, cooing, beautiful, so beautiful, a dream. Beneath the fat leaves of catalpa trees, and my Marxist friend, ironic, mordant, groans, ah yes indeed, how beautifully the rich lie down upon the backs of the poor. But I am somewhere else, an empty field near Black Bear Creek in western Oklahoma, brought there by that ancient word, dream. My father saying, "You had the dream, horse." And 2 men toss a baseball back and forth as the sun dissolves behind the pearl gray strands of a cirrus and the frayed, flaming branches along the creek, so that the men too seem to be on fire. And the other one, a tall Pawnee named Moses Yellow Horse, drops his glove and says, "But I wasn't a man there." And there, I know, is Pittsburgh, and man means something more like human. For as a boy, I had heard this story many times, beginning always, He was the fastest I ever caught, the fastest I think there ever was. And I was stunned, because for a boy in America, to be the fastest was to be a god. And now my father and his brothers move behind a scrim of dust in a fallow wheat field, a blanket stretched between two posts to make a backstop, a stand of maize to mark the outfield wall, while their father watches. If an Indian can make it, then so by God can they. And so it goes. The story of failure in America. Icarus unwarned, strapped with his father's wings. My father one winter morning patching the drive line of an old Ford tractor with a strand of baling wire, blood popping out along his knuckles, and then in fury turning to his father, "I'm not good enough. I'll never get there. And I'm sorry. I'm goddamn sorry." While Moses Yellow Horse is drunk again and throwing water balloons from the Hotel Roosevelt because now he is Chief Yellow Horse. And even though in a feat of almost angelic beauty he struck out Gehrig, Ruth, and Lazare with 9 straight heaters, something isn't right. So one day he throws a head ball at Ty Cobb and then tells my father he was an Indian hater. Even his teammates smiled. And now, trying to explain this to my friends, it occurs to me that unlike the Villa Carlotta, baseball is a question of neither beauty nor politics, but rather mythology, the collective dream, the old dream of men becoming gods, or at the very least, as they remove their wings, being recognized as men. Okay. I apparently did not put it together enough poems to fill up a whole hour, so I actually don't know. I was supposed to read for like 40 minutes, 50 minutes? Okay. Actually, I like to read at least one of the long-ish poems. Please, don't leave. And I didn't think I would have time for that tonight. I have a shorter poem to end with, but because I've only been reading for 30 minutes, I've never really had a good sense of time at all. I was actually late to my workshop today. Yes. I have a poem called Ray Vaughan, which I'm going to read to you. Since it's not on my list, now I have to locate it. There it is. What it has to do with is in this little town where I grew up, there were many fine things about it. At least a couple of fine things about it. But the main thing, I'm afraid, for me was boredom, and that was true for a lot of the boys in the high school. I'm sure it was true for the girls too. But what would happen in the summer is that the lucky boys would get jobs on combine crews, harvesting and going up through the Plain States all the way into Canada and then coming back. And of course we envied them because they would have adventures and they would get drunk and they would get in fights and they might lose their virginity. Probably not, but that's one of the things they were seeking. And of course back in town we thought they surely had been successful at least 187 times. And so that would leave us back in town and we would begin to go crazy, but some of the boys would go crazy before the other boys, and what I find I'm doing is there's 2 poems that have almost the same introduction, and I think I'm introducing the wrong poem here. Okay. Okay, if you just wipe out the last sentence. Where I wanted to go with this was that not during the summer, but during the regular year, a strange thing was beginning to happen, and that is, in those days, boys were so good with cars. You could go out to the junkyard, buy an old heap of something, and maybe $20 for the necessary parts, and a couple of nights in the garage, and you could at least get it to run. And you could take it out on a highway where there was no fence line, and if you could get it up to, say, 60 or 70 miles an hour, the driver would then flip the wheel real fast, and it would make the car roll. I suppose the idea is that the best way to fight boredom is to approach death as closely as possible. But that's what was going on, and it got so out of hand that they were beginning to compete how many times they could roll the car. I don't need to remind you that this was before safety belts, and so it really was quite an adventure, and of course quite a really stupid adventure. Usually when things like this, acts like this, in which boys do very violent or dangerous things, in the English lit classes, it's almost always referred to as a rite of passage, you know. This is their sort of stupid way of becoming men, of passing from innocence to experience. And I don't think so. I think in many cases it's their last claim on childhood. And I think maybe that was the case in this particular situation. In the poem there are 4 boys, and they're all scared to death of what they're about to go out and do for the first time. One of them, who is named Travis Doyle, it has a totally different attitude about it. He's not scared. He's eager, as you will see in the poem. There are references to caliche, which is white road covering in that part of the country. There's a reference to Coronado's treasure. You would hear the story from time to time that when Coronado came up that far north, he had buried a treasure somewhere around the town, which of course was total BS, but what else do I need to explain here? Oh yes, the narrator. The narrator's speech is punctuated with biblical phrases, and he does not mean at all that he's pious in any way. He certainly isn't, but it's just a kind of speech habit that one also finds in the Deep South, and has nothing to do with him being an enthusiastic believer. Oh yes, and you also need to know that in New Mexico and Arizona, there are actually quite a few monasteries. Rave on. The epigraph is from the great James Dickey poem, Cherry Log Road, wild to be wreckage forever. Rumbling over caliche with a busted muffler, radio blasting Buddy Holly over Baptist wheat fields, Travis screaming out, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord," at jackrabbits skittering beneath our headlights, the Messiah coming to Kansas in a flathead Ford with bad plates, the whole high plains holding its breath, night is fast upon us, lo, and these the days of our youth, and we were hell on wheels, or thought we were. Boredom grows thick as maize in Kansas, heavy as drill pipe littering the racks of oil rigs wherein summer boys roust about or work on combine crews north as far as Canada. The ones left back in town begin to die, dragging Main Street shit-faced on 3-2 beer and banging on the whorehouse door in Garden City where the ancient madam laughed and turned us down since we were only boys and she knew our fathers. We sat out front spitting Red Man and scanned a landscape flat as Dresden. Me, Mike Luckenbill, Billy Hines, and Travis Doyle, who sang, "I'm gonna live fast, love hard, and die young." We had eaten all the life there was in Seward County, but hungry still, hauled ass to old Arcalon, the ghost town on the Cimarron that lay in half shadow and a scattering of starlight and its stillness was a kind of death, the last breath of whatever in our lives was ending. We had drunk there and tossed our bottles at the walls and pissed great arcs into the Kansas earth, where the dust groweth hard and the clods cleave fast together, yea, where night yawns above the river in its long dark dream, above haggard branches of mesquite, chicken hawks scudding into the tree line, and moon glitter on Coeche, like the silver plates of Coronado's treasure buried all these years, but the absence of treasure, absence of whatever would return the world to the strangeness that as children we embraced and recognized as life. Rave on. Cars are cheap at Roman salvage, strewn along the fence out back where cattle graze and chew rotting fabric from the seats. $20 for spare parts and a night in the garage could make them run as far as death and stupidity required. On Johnson Road, where 2 miles of low shoulders and no fence line would take you up to 60, say, and when you flipped the wheel clockwise, you were there rolling in the belly of the whale, belly of hell, and your soul fainteth within you, for we had seen it done by big Ed Ravenscroft, who said you would go in a boy and come out a man. And so we headed back through town, where the marquee of the plaza flashed creature from the Black Lagoon and storefront windows, and the snack shack where we had spent our lives was shutting down, and we sang Rave On, It's a Crazy Feeling, out into the night that loomed now like a darkened church, and sang loud and louder still, for we were sore afraid. Coming up out of the long tunnel of cottonwoods that opens onto Johnson Road, Travis with his foot stuck deep into the soul of that old Ford. Come on, Bubba, come on, beating the dash with his fist, hair flaming back in the wind and eyes lit up by some fire in his head that I had never seen. And Mike, Iron Mike, sitting tall and back with Billy, who would pick a fight with anything that moved, but now hunched over, mumbling something like a prayer, as the Ford lurched on, spitting and coughing, but then smoothing out suddenly fast, and the fence line quitting, so it was open field. Then, I think, we were butt deep in regret and a rush of remembering whatever we would leave behind. Samantha Dobbins, smelling like fresh laundry, light from the movie spilling down her long blonde hair, trout leaping all silver and pink from Black Bear Creek, the hand of my mother, I confess, passing gentle across my face at night when I was a child. Oh yes, it was all good now and too late. Trees blurring past and Travis wild popping the wheel. Oh, too late, and the waters pass over us. The air thick as mud slams against our chest, though turning now, the car in its slow turning seems almost graceful. The frame in agony like some huge animal groaning, and when the wheels leave the ground, the engine cuts loose with the whale thin and ragged as a bandsaw cutting tin. And we are drowning, breathless, heads jammed against our knees, and it's a thick, swirling purple nightmare we cannot wake up from, for the world is turning too, and I hear Billy screaming, and then the whomp, sick crunch of grass and glass and metal. Whomp again, back window popping loose and glass exploding, someone crying out, tink, tink of iron on iron overhead, and then at last it's over and the quiet comes. Oh, so quiet. Somewhere the creak and grind of a pumping unit. Crickets. The tall grass sifting the wind in a mass of whispers that I know I'll be hearing when I die. And so we crawled trembling from doors and windows, born out of rage and boredom, into weed-choked fields barren as Golgotha. Blood raked the side of Travis's face, grinning rapt, ecstatic. Mike's arm was hanging down like a broken curtain rod. Billy kneeled, stunned, listening as we all did to the rustling silence and the spinning wheels in their sad, manic song as the Ford's high beams hurled their cross poles of light forever out into the deep and future darkness. Rave on. Well, I survived. We all did. And then came the long surrender. The long, slow drifting down like young hawks riding on the purest, thinnest air, the very palm of God holding them aloft, so close to something hidden there. And then the letting go, the fluttering descent, claws spread wide against the world, and we become, at last, our fathers, and do not know ourselves, and therefore no longer know each other. Mike Luckenbill ran a Texaco in town for years. Billy Hines survived a cruel divorce, remarried, then took to drink. Finally, last week, I found this house in Arizona where the brothers take new names and keep a vow of silence and make a quiet place for any weary or lost passenger of earth whose unquiet life has brought him there. And so after Vespers, I sat across the table from men who had not surrendered to the world. And one of them looked at me and looked into me. And I'm telling you, there was a fire in his head, and his eyes were coming fast down a caliche road. And I knew this man, and his name was Travis Doyle. Thank you, and now we will approach my final poem. Again, I had a lot of little jobs when I was a kid, and although I worked for my dad at the machine shop, I somehow felt like that wasn't a real job, and I considered my first real job as being an usher at the theater in town. They actually did have ushers in all the little theaters. We had two theaters, of course. That meant that one theater was the nice theater, and the other one was the bad theater. And at the nice theater, they would show, all the current movies, and at the bad theater where I ushered, they would show all those really cheap old science fiction movies. Although I actually appreciated that because I actually got to see the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And if you want to be a schizophrenic for the rest of your life, you should see the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. What is really amazing when I think back on that is that they had ushers at all. I mean, the big theaters in Kansas City had ushers, so they should have ushers too. But they even had uniforms for us. And so, there I was with my red blazer with little brass buttons and white shirt and black slacks and my black plastic bow tie. And so in this particular poem, I am ushering dressed in such a way, and I am exactly at that age, about 14, where teenagers feel like they're really nobody. I mean, it's a real identity crisis phase you pass through. You don't really know who you are, and it really bothers you. And that's a phase, where every other week you're going to be something different. I'm going to be a rock musician. I'm going to be a baseball player, because you want to give yourself some kind of identity, but you can't really do it. You're nothing yet, or at least in this poem, I feel like I'm nobody at that time. So that's my problem as an usher in this. The particular movie that I'm ushering is a great movie called On the Waterfront, which is about a corrupt longshore union in New York. And in the movie, Marlon Brando plays a character who has to make this awful choice of whether to, this young man was murdered by the mob, and he has to make the choice of whether, and he's just a lowly worker, a longshoreman, not anybody in the administration or the mob of the union, and he has to decide whether to rat on the union about murdering this kid or keep his mouth shut and feel guilty for the rest of his life. So that's his issue. In that movie, a lot of you have seen it, but you've got Marlon Brando plays a character named Terry Malloy. Edie is played, somebody remembers the movie better than I do. Yes, right. How could I forget her since I was in love with her? Yeah. Carl Malden plays Father Barry. Pop is a character you actually don't need to know about. And so, you know, that's basically it. I mean, what the mob is what the union is doing is simply being controlled by the mob. And so Marlon Brando has to think about standing up against them. There is a particular, you know, my hometown people are coming to the movie, and there's one particular one you need to remember, and her name is Mrs. Pierce. And Mrs. Pierce was my high school Latin teacher. And the epigraph to the poem, which is called On the Waterfront, is simply know thyself. And the Latin for know thyself is nosce te ipsum. If you would just remember that, nosce te ipsum, through the poem. And I believe now I can read it to you. On the waterfront. Flashlight in hand, I stand just inside the door in my starched white shirt, red jacket nailed shut by 6 gold buttons, and a plastic black bow tie, a sort of smaller movie screen reflecting back the larger one. Is that really you? Says Mrs. Pierce, my Latin teacher, as I lead her to her seat between the Niederlands, our neighbors, and Mickey Breen, who owns the liquor store. Walking back, I see their faces bright and childlike in the mirrored glare of a tragic winter New York sky. I know them all, these small-town worried faces, these natives of the known, the real, a highway and brown fields, and New York is a foreign land, the waterfront, unions, priests, the tugboats moan, exotic as Siam or Casablanca. I have seen this movie 7 times, memorized the lines. Edie, raised by nuns, pleading, praying, really. Isn't everybody a part of everybody else? And Terry, angry, stunned with guilt. Quit worrying about the truth. Worry about yourself. While I, in this one movie Kansas town where everyone is a part of everybody else, am waiting darkly for a self to worry over. A name, a place. New York, on 52nd Street between the 5 Spot and Jimmy Ryan's, where bebop and blue neon lights would fill my room, and I would wear a pork pie hat and play tenor saxophone like Lester Young. But now, however, I am lost. And Edie too, and Charlie, Father Barry, Pop, even Terry, because he worried more about the truth than he did about himself. And I scan the little mounds of bodies now lost even to themselves as the movie rushes to its end, car lights winging down an alley, quick shadows fluttering across this east river of familiar faces like storm clouds cluttering a wheat field or geese in autumn plowing through the sun, that honking, that moan of a boat in fog. I walk outside to cop a smoke. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of what I am. And look across the street at the Army-Navy store where we would try on gas masks, and Elmer Fox would let us hold the Purple Hearts. But it's over now, and they are leaving. Good night, Mr. Niederland. Good night, Mrs. Niederland. Good night, Mick. Good night, Mrs. Pierce. As she, a woman who has lived alone for 40 years, and for 2 of those has suffered through my botched translations from the Latin tongue, smiles, nosce te ipsum, and I have no idea what she means. Thank you.